Star Trek, Primitive Passenger, Season 5, Episode 7, Tabula Rasa. The artificial dawn of Empire North gradually brightened Nolan's quarters, casting soft shadows across the rumpled bedsheets. Kilana stirred first, her violet eyes opening to find herself nestled against Nolan's chest, his arm draped protectively around her. For a moment she simply watched him sleep. The rare vulnerability in his features, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. She traced a finger along the outline of his jaw, savoring the contact. These quiet moments were precious to her, all the more so for what she was planning. Nolan's eyes opened slowly, consciousness returning with practiced efficiency. A smile softened his features when he saw her watching him. "How long have you been awake?" he asked, voice still rough with sleep. "Not long," she replied, pressing closer against him. "I was just thinking." "Dangerous pastime," he murmured, running his hand along the curve of her spine. "Especially for scientists." Kilana smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. "I was thinking about Dr. Marcus, actually." "Not exactly who I'd hoped was on your mind this morning," Nolan said with mock disappointment. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "What he did was remarkable, Nolan. Transferring his consciousness to a new body, starting over without the pain, without the limitations of his damaged form." "A bold move," Nolan agreed, his hand still tracing idle patterns on her skin, "though not without risk. We don't know if the accelerated aging can be controlled." "Natima believes his aging will stabilize once he reaches physical maturity," Kilana said. "The Dominion designed the process to create adult Jem'Hadar in days, not to continue aging them to death." "And what about his mind?" "All that knowledge, all those memories crammed into a child's developing brain." Kilana's expression grew thoughtful. "The consciousness transfer matrix preserves neural patterns precisely. His mind is intact, just housed in a younger body." Her fingers traced the line of Nolan's collarbone. "It's freedom, in a way. Freedom from what was done to him." Something in her tone caught Nolan's attention. He studied her face more carefully. "You sound like you envy him." "Perhaps I do," she admitted. "To be reborn without the limitations others imposed on you. Isn't that what everyone wants, deep down?" Nolan pulled her closer. "You've been spending too much time in the lab. The cloning technology is fascinating, but it's just a tool, Kilana, not a solution to every problem." She rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "What if it could be, though? What if we could use it to truly change things? Not just for former Borg, but for others trapped by their own design." "Like the Vorta?" Nolan asked quietly. "Like anyone who wasn't given a choice in what they became," she replied. They lay together in companionable silence, Nolan's fingers gently combing through her hair. After a while he spoke again. "Marcus could be an asset to our team, regardless of how his experiment turns out. His insights on neural patterning could advance our work considerably." "If he lives long enough," Kilana reminded him. "Even if he doesn't," Nolan said, "what he's already shown us about consciousness transfer could be the key to the entire project. The combination of Vorta cloning techniques with his neural mapping expertise might give us exactly what we need." Kilana nodded against his chest, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Yes," she said softly, "it might be exactly what we need." The morning cycle continued brightening, but neither made a move to leave the sanctuary of their shared space. For now, the war, the research, the endless calculations of survival could wait. There was only this moment, this connection, however fleeting it might prove to be. Time. The laboratory hummed with activity as Dr. Hugh Marcus, now physically a teenager but with the mind and knowledge of a brilliant scientist, worked with feverish intensity at his console. His youthful face carried an incongruous intensity, fingers moving across the interface with practiced precision, despite his adolescent physique. Natima watched him from her workstation, her Cardassian features carefully neutral as she studied both his work and his rapidly maturing form. In the 3 days since his rebirth, Marcus had aged from infant to teenager, his body growing and developing at a pace that defied natural biology. Cellular mitosis remains at 27 times normal human rate, she noted, checking her readings, though it's beginning to taper slightly as you approach physical maturity. Marcus barely looked up from his console. The deceleration curve is within expected parameters. I'll likely reach physical maturity within another 36 hours. His voice cracked slightly, a teenager's voice betraying the adult mind within. He frowned at the sound, clearly irritated by his body's limitations. Kilana entered the lab, carrying a data pad with the latest neural scans. "Your synaptic activity is remarkable," she said, placing the pad beside Marcus. The consciousness transfer was more complete than in any Vorta iteration I've ever studied. The transfer was better than I'd hoped, Marcus agreed, finally looking up from his work. His eyes, intelligent and ancient in his young face, moved between Natima and Kilana. "But you should know, my research was incomplete when I launched the creation of this body." Natima's attention sharpened. "Incomplete how?" Marcus gestured to his teenage form. "The accelerated growth won't stop. I knew this when I made my decision." He said this matter-of-factly, as though discussing an interesting but impersonal scientific phenomenon rather than his own mortality. "That can't be right," Kilana said, quickly accessing the genetic markers in his profile. "The Dominion protocols are designed to stabilize at maturity. We should be able to." "Not with my modifications," Marcus interrupted. "The neural density required for consciousness transfer necessitated changes to the base genetic template. Those changes have side effects." He continued working, his young hands moving with the efficiency of decades of practice. "This body will continue aging, just at a slower rate than its initial growth." Natima studied him closely. "How long?" "A month, perhaps 2, he replied without emotion. "Enough time to complete my research, if I work efficiently." "And you can't be recloned?" Kilana asked, already suspecting the answer. Shook his head. "The modifications I made to accommodate the consciousness transfer altered the genetic structure too significantly. Any attempt to clone from this body would result in fatal neural degradation." He pulled up a complex diagram of neural pathways. "This is why my work is so urgent. I need to solve the stability problem before this body fails." "So your plan is to work yourself to death, finishing research that others will use after you're gone?" Natima's tone was sharp, almost accusatory. Marcus looked at her, his young face solemn. "I've died many deaths already, Dr. Colmack. Watching my wife be murdered by drones, my own assimilation, and the death of the drone, awakening. A mangled shell of my former self. This time, at least, my death will have purpose." He turned back to his work. "There are thousands of former Borg struggling with bodies that reject their implants, minds trapped in failing flesh. If my research can save even some of them, then this temporary existence is worth the cost." Kilana and Natima exchanged glances, both recognizing the determination and resignation in his words. For a moment the laboratory fell silent except for the steady beeping of equipment and Marcus's continued work. "I'll adjust your nutrient supplements to support accelerated neural development," Natima finally said, moving to her station. "And I'll recalibrate the consciousness transfer matrix to compensate for the degradation patterns you're experiencing," Kilana added, her violet eyes lingering on Marcus with newfound understanding. Marcus nodded without looking up, already lost in his calculations. The quest to save others from the fate he had temporarily escaped consumed him entirely, the ticking clock of his abbreviated life driving him forward with relentless purpose. Prot. The station's night cycle was giving way to morning when Natima entered the laboratory. She moved with brisk efficiency, already mentally cataloging the tasks for the day ahead, recalibrating Marcus's nutrient protocols, analyzing the neural stability readings from yesterday's scans, refining the consciousness transfer algorithms. Her thoughts scattered as a shrill alarm pierced the silence. Her head snapped toward the source. one of the cloning pods, its status indicators flashing red. "Computer, report pod malfunction," she demanded, rushing toward the equipment. "No malfunction detected," the computer responded. "Gestation cycle complete. Extraction required." Natima slowed her approach, confusion replacing alarm. "Extraction? There shouldn't be any active gestation cycles." She reached the pod, wiping condensation from its display to read the indicators. "Vorta genetic signature detected," she murmured. "But that's not possible, unless—" The realization struck her just as the pod's transparent cover slid back, revealing a tiny Vorta infant inside. Purple eyes opened, blinking against the laboratory lights. A soft, mewling cry emerged from the tiny form. "Kilana," Natima whispered, the name escaping before she could process the implications. She lifted the infant carefully, wrapping her in a nearby thermal blanket. The baby, a perfect miniature of Kilana, squirmed and continued her soft cries. Natima tapped her comm badge. "Colmac to Kilana. Respond immediately." Only silence answered. "Kilana, this is not a request. Report to the laboratory at once." Still nothing. The infant's cries grew more insistent. "Computer, locate Kilana." "Kilana is in Science Laboratory 1, the computer responded. Natima looked around the empty lab, the impossible truth beginning to dawn. She tapped her badge again. "Colmac to Ilara." "Ilara here," came the immediate response. "I need you to locate Kilana. It's urgent." A brief pause. "Her biosigns and comm badge show she's in the lab with you, Dr. Colmac. Isn't she there?" Natima looked down at the infant in her arms, the violet eyes that were unmistakably Kilana's staring back at her. "No," she said softly. "She's not. At least, not as we knew her." "I don't understand." Ilara's voice carried a note of concern. "I believe Kilana has done exactly what Marcus did. She's transferred her consciousness to a clone body, an infant Vorta." Natima checked the pod's logs with her free hand. The process was initiated at W247 hours. Another pause, longer this time. "Dr. Colmac," Ilara's voice had changed, become more formal, more distant. "There's something you should know. At 03112 hours, there was an unauthorized access to the station's waste reclamation system, specifically the matter incinerator." Natima's breath caught. "You don't mean—" "I've just checked the security logs." It was Kilana. The infant in Natima's arms gave another cry, louder now, demanding attention from a universe it had just entered. Natima held her closer, her scientific detachment momentarily forgotten. "I'll inform Nolan," Ilara said. "He should be told immediately." "Yes," Natima agreed, her eyes never leaving the infant's face. "And Ilara, we'll need the Vorta development protocols. This child will need specialized care." "Understood." Ilara out. Natima stood alone in the laboratory, cradling the infant who both was and wasn't Kilana. She spoke softly to her, words meant only for the two of them. "You've made a choice, haven't you? A choice that can't be unmade." The baby's cries subsided as Natima gently rocked her. "Let's hope it brings you what you're looking for." Nolan materialized in the laboratory, his face ashen. Ilara had told him only that there was an urgent situation involving Kilana. Nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him. Natima stood beside an incubation unit, monitoring the vital signs of a tiny Vorta infant. "What happened?" he demanded, crossing the room in long strides. "Where's Kilana?" Natima gestured toward the infant. "In a manner of speaking, she's right here." "That's not funny, Natma." "It wasn't meant to be." She stepped aside, revealing the infant more clearly. Kilana used the cloning technology and consciousness transfer matrix to create this child herself, reborn without the founder's loyalty programming. Nolan stared at the infant, disbelief written across his face. "And the original Kilana?" "Gone," Natima said quietly. "She used the matter incinerator." The color drained from Nolan's face. "She did what?" His voice was barely audible. "Why would she do that? Why wouldn't she tell me?" "There's a message," Ilara said, materializing beside them. "She left it in the main computer, encoded for you specifically." Nolan's jaw tightened. "Play it." A holographic display shimmered to life above the incubation unit. Kilana appeared, her familiar features composed, but her eyes betraying emotion. "Nolan," her recorded image began, "if you're watching this, then I've succeeded. I've found a way to break the chains the Founders built into my DNA, the compulsion to serve them, to love them above all others." She looked down briefly, collecting herself. "You must understand, as long as I existed in my original form, I would never truly be free. The loyalty, the devotion to the Founders wasn't just training or indoctrination. It was written into every cell of my body." The hologram paused, as if gathering courage for what came next. "I couldn't bear it anymore. Loving you with my heart while my genes pulled me toward beings who see me as nothing but a tool. I discovered the specific sequences in my DNA that encode that loyalty and modified the template. My new self, the child you'll watch grow, will have all my memories, all my feelings for you, but without the conflict, without the divided loyalty." Her image smiled, though tears glimmered in her eyes. "When my replacement ages up, she will love you the way I do, but without the Founders pulling me away from you, she'll be truly free to choose, in a way I never was." Nolan's hand reached toward the hologram, stopping just short of where her cheek would be. "I didn't tell you because you would have tried to stop me, to find another way. But there is no other way, Nolan, not for me. This is my choice, the first true choice I've ever made." Her smile softened. "Take care of her, of me, and know that I did this because I wanted to love you completely, without reservation or division. Goodbye, Nolan." The message ended, the hologram dissolving into particles of light that faded away. Nolan stood motionless, his hand still raised where her image had been. "She erased herself," he whispered. "To create a new beginning," Natima said gently. "One without the Founders' influence." Nolan turned to look at the infant in the incubation unit, so tiny, so vulnerable, yet carrying within her the consciousness of the woman he had come to care for deeply. "How long until she matures?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Based on the Vorta development protocols Kilana programmed, approximately 7 days to reach adolescence. Then the gradually slowing growth rate until adulthood." Natima checked the monitors. Her neural readings are stable. The consciousness transfer appears to have been successful. Nolan moved closer to the incubation unit, studying the child's features. The curve of her brow, the shape of her eyes. Unmistakably Kilana, yet somehow new. "She left us," he said, the words heavy with loss. "She transformed herself," Ilara corrected gently, "for a chance at genuine freedom." Nolan placed his hand against the transparent surface of the incubation unit. The infant's eyes, those unmistakable violet eyes, seemed to focus on him briefly before closing in sleep. "I'll be here," he promised softly. "When you wake up." The days blurred together as Nolan moved through Empire North like a ghost. He attended briefings, reviewed tactical data, and issued commands with mechanical precision. But his mind remained in the laboratory where young Kilana grew at an accelerated rate, transforming from infant to child to adolescent before his eyes. He visited the laboratory during every free moment, watching her development with a mixture of grief and hope that left him feeling hollowed out. The station's personnel gave him a wide berth, recognizing the storm of emotions beneath his stoic exterior. On the 5th day, he entered the lab to find a teenage Kilana carefully analyzing genetic sequences with Dr. Marcus. The former Borg scientist had aged rapidly as well, his once teenage form now resembling a man in his late 40s, lines of fatigue etching themselves around his eyes. "The neural mapping in this section is remarkable," young Kilana was saying, her voice carrying the familiar melodic quality of her predecessor, but with a brightness, an enthusiasm that seemed new. "The Founders were meticulous in their design, but not infallible," Marcus replied, glancing up to notice Nolan's arrival. "Mr. Mercer," he acknowledged with a nod before returning to his work. Kilana turned, her violet eyes lighting up at the sight of Nolan. "You're here," she exclaimed, rushing toward him with none of the reserve or caution her previous self had maintained. She stopped just short of embracing him, uncertainty flickering across her features. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping back slightly. "I know this must be strange for you. I have all her memories, all her feelings, but," she gestured to her youthful form, "I'm not exactly who I was." Nolan studied her face, so familiar yet transformed by the unguarded emotions playing across it. "How much do you remember?" he asked quietly. "Everything," she replied, "but it's different now. Like remembering a dream where something was always pulling at you, always dividing your attention." Her eyes met his directly, without the shadow that had always lingered in her predecessor's gaze. "That pull is gone now. The loyalty programming was excised from my genetic structure." Natima approached from her workstation, her usual Cardassian composure slightly frayed around the edges. "Her neural development is progressing exactly as anticipated," she reported. "Consciousness integration is at 97%. By tomorrow, she should reach physical maturity, though her aging will continue at a slower rate." "And how are you feeling?" Nolan asked Kilana directly. Her smile was radiant, unfettered by the genetic chains her previous self had struggled against. "Free," she said simply. "I feel free." The word hung in the air between them, both promise and elegy. "And you, Dr. Marcus," Nolan turned to the aging scientist. "Your work appears to be progressing." Marcus nodded, the movement slightly stiff as his body continued its accelerated journey toward old age. "I've isolated the key factors causing the instability in the clone matrices. With proper genetic buffering, we should be able to create bodies with normal lifespans in future iterations." He glanced down at his increasingly lined hands. "Too late for me, of course, but that was never the point." "Your sacrifice won't be wasted," Nolan assured him. "It's not a sacrifice if it's freely chosen," Marcus replied, turning back to his work. "Now, if you'll excuse me, time isn't exactly on my side." As Marcus returned to his research, Natima pulled Nolan aside, her voice lowered. "He won't last the month. The cellular deterioration is accelerating." She glanced toward the scientist, a rare hint of empathy in her eyes. "But he's accomplishing more in these few days than most scientists achieve in a lifetime." "And Kilana?" Nolan asked, watching as the young Vorta returned to her own station, her movements energetic and purposeful. "Physically, she's perfect," Natima replied. "Mentally, she's still integrating her consciousness with her developing brain. There may be adjustments in her personality as the process completes. Meaning she has all of Kilana's memories, but without the emotional and psychological constraints the Founders built into her. That freedom might manifest in unexpected ways." Natima's expression grew thoughtful. "She's more open, more expressive than before. It's guarded. Whether that's temporary or permanent remains to be seen." Nolan nodded, his eyes never leaving the young Vorta as she worked. The woman he had known had erased herself from existence, leaving behind this reborn version. The same, yet fundamentally different. The grief of loss warred with the hope of something new, something untainted by the Founder's manipulation. "Keep me updated on both of them," he said finally, turning to leave. "Nolan," Kilana called, that new brightness in her voice stopping him at the door. "Will you come back later? I'd like to show you what we've discovered about the consciousness transfer process." He looked back at her, this newer, brighter version of Kilana, and managed a small smile. "I'll be back," he promised. As the doors closed behind him, Nolan took a deep breath. The station continued its routines around him, crew members moving with purpose, systems humming with efficiency, but for him, everything had changed. A woman he had cared for had sacrificed herself to be reborn without her chains, while a brilliant scientist worked feverishly against his body's rapid decay to save others from suffering. Life, death, and rebirth, playing out in the confines of Empire North while war raged across 2 quadrants. The cosmic irony wasn't lost on Nolan as he headed toward Ops, his steps a little lighter than they had been in days. The Maldor cruiser drifted silently through the shadows of an asteroid field, its running lights dimmed to minimal output. On the bridge, Nolan and Lexa studied the sensor readings of a sprawling Dominion facility nestled within the largest asteroid. Definitely a cloning operation, Nolan confirmed, manipulating the display to enhance specific energy signatures. Look at these power fluctuations, classic pattern for accelerated growth chambers. Lexa leaned closer, her eyes gleaming with predatory interest. It's larger than the ones we've hit in the Gamma Quadrant. Security protocols appear to be Cardassian in design, but there's Dominion technology layered throughout. Probably training at least a division of Jem'Hadar at a time, Nolan mused. Right here in Alpha Quadrant space. Should we call in the Havoc? Lexa asked, already calculating attack vectors. Nolan shook his head. Reconnaissance only for now. We need to map their defenses completely before bringing in the heavy guns. He adjusted the sensors for a more detailed scan. One more pass around the perimeter, then we'll... The proximity alarm blared, cutting him off. The sensor display suddenly flared with new contacts, a lot of them. Dominion warships. Lexa called out, her fingers flying across the tactical console. 3 Jem'Hadar attack vessels approaching from bearing 227 Mark IV and, her voice tightened, Cardassian Galar-class cruisers decloaking astern. Trap, Nolan spat, already moving to the pilot station. They knew we were coming. Attempting to calculate blink coordinates, Lexa reported, her voice tense. The ship lurched violently as a polaron beam struck their starboard side. Warning lights flashed across the bridge as systems began to fail. Direct hit. I can't blink us out of here, Lexa announced, frustration evident in her tone. Primary power coupling severed. Another hit rocked the ship, throwing Nolan against the navigation console. Can we restore the drive? Not without replacing the coupling, Lexa replied as the ship shuddered under continuous bombardment. We're dead in space. Nolan's eyes narrowed as he assessed their rapidly deteriorating situation. Options? Lexa's holographic form flickered momentarily as she redirected power to defensive systems. I can call in the drones we deployed for perimeter scouting, but it's only a dozen units, not enough to take on this fleet. Do it, Nolan ordered, checking the weapon status, and charge the transporters. If we can't fight our way out, maybe we can sneak out. The view screen showed the approaching Dominion vessels, their formations tightening as they moved to surround the tiny disabled Maldor. Interspersed between them, Lexa's drones blinked in and out of existence, their attacks little more than an annoyance against the larger ship's shields. No effect, Lexa growled, her frustration growing as she watched her drone's weapons barely scratching the enemy shields. Without access to the Havoc's systems, I can't coordinate enough firepower to make a difference. Another hit sent sparks cascading from an overhead conduit. The lights dimmed as emergency power engaged. Transporters, Nolan asked, steadying himself against his console. Operational, Lexa confirmed. But where would we go? No planets in range, and the asteroid facility is too heavily shielded. Nolan pointed to the largest Dominion ship on the tactical display. There, we transport to their battlecruiser. Lexa's eyes widened. You want to board an enemy vessel? If we can access their communications array, we might be able to call the Havoc. Nolan was already moving to the weapons locker, retrieving his twin katanas and strapping them to his back. It's our only shot. Lexa considered for a moment, then nodded, her tactical programming analyzing and confirming his assessment. Agreed, but infiltrating a Dominion vessel with just the 2 of us. Wouldn't be my first bloody day at the office, Nolan finished grimly, checking the power level on his blaster. Ready your holomatrix for combat conditions. As the enemy ships closed in for capture, Nolan and Lexa stood side by side on the small bridge. The Maldor shuddered around them as tractor beams engaged from multiple vessels. Now, Nolan commanded. Lexa initiated the transport sequence, her eyes meeting Nolan's as the Maldor's bizarre transporter let out a bark. The drop materialized into a deserted corridor of the Dominion battlecruiser, the purple-hued lighting casting eerie shadows across the angular bulkheads. "Communications array should be 2 decks up," Lexa whispered, accessing the ship's layout from her memory banks. "But security checkpoints at every junction." Nolan unsheathed his katanas, the polished blades gleaming in the dim light. "Then we'll have to make a path." They moved silently through the corridor, but it wasn't long before they encountered the first patrol. 3 Jem'Hadar soldiers moving in tight formation. Without hesitation, Nolan launched himself forward, blades whirling in a deadly arc. The first Jem'Hadar went down before he could raise his weapon, throat sliced open in a spray of purple blood. The second managed to fire a single shot that went wide before Nolan's blade severed his arm at the elbow. The third soldier charged, but Lexa was suddenly there, her holographic form solid enough to grab the Jem'Hadar's weapon and twist it from his grasp. With surprising strength, she slammed him against the bulkhead, her eyes alight with a fierce joy. "I've never felt this before," she gasped as her hands closed around the Jem'Hadar's throat. The direct contact, the resistance of flesh, the moment of... The soldier went limp, and she let the body fall. "Surrender." Nolan, already splattered with purple blood, gave her a sharp nod. "Different than coordinating drones." "Entirely," she replied, looking down at her hands with newfound fascination. "This is immediate, personal." An alarm blared, cutting their conversation short. "They've detected the intruders," Lexa said, wiping Jem'Hadar blood from her face. "We need to move." They sprinted through the corridors, encountering increasingly heavy resistance. Nolan moved like a force of nature, his blades never still, cutting through Jem'Hadar and Cardassian soldiers alike with terrible efficiency. Purple and red blood mingled on the deck plates, creating a grotesque trail that marked their progress. Lexa matched him step for step, her holographic form now fully committed to direct combat. She used every surface, every weapon she could grasp, transforming the environment itself into an extension of her will. Where Nolan was precise and lethal, she was raw and experimental, discovering the joy of physical combat with every swing, every impact, every kill. "This way," she called, pointing to a junction ahead after dispatching a Cardassian officer with his own disruptor. Blood, Jem'Hadar purple, Cardassian red drenched her form, but she seemed oblivious to it, reveling in the visceral nature of their advance. They fought their way to a sealed door marked with Dominion symbols. "Communications," Lexa confirmed, working to override the lock while Nolan held the corridor against approaching security forces. The door slid open to reveal a large command center, staffed by Vorta officers and Cardassian technicians. Their shock at the blood-drenched intruders gave Nolan and Lexa the moment they needed. What followed was pure slaughter. Nolan moved through the room like a demon from ancient myth, his blades finding flesh with unerring accuracy. Lexa was right beside him, her laughter echoing off the bulkheads as she discovered new ways to end life with her hands. In moments, the room was theirs, the deck slick with blood and bodies. Lexa, still buzzing with the euphoria of close combat, moved to the communications console. Establishing quantum link with the Havoc, she reported, fingers dancing across the blood-spattered controls. "Ilara should be able to track our signal." Nolan stood guard at the door, his katanas dripping onto the deck. "How long?" "Minutes," Lexa replied, "assuming they haven't." The door exploded inward, showering them with debris. A squad of Jem'Hadar stormed through, firing as they came. Nolan met them head-on, his blades flashing in the chaos of disruptor fire. Lexa abandoned the console to join him, her movements now fluid and confident as she engaged in the dance of death she had so quickly come to love. Together they held the line, bodies piling up at their feet, blood slicking their hands and faces. But more soldiers kept coming, wave after wave of Jem'Hadar and Cardassians determined to retake the communications center. "Did we get through?" Nolan shouted over the din of battle, his breathing heavy as he dispatched another Gem Hadar. "Signal sent," Lexa confirmed, snapping a Cardassian's neck with disturbing ease. "But I don't know if—" The ship shuddered violently, throwing attackers and defenders alike off balance. A second impact, stronger than the first, rattled the bulkheads. "That's not enemy fire," Nolan said, a grim smile forming beneath the mask of blood that covered his face. "That's our girl." Outside, the Havoc had arrived, its massive form dwarfing the Dominion vessels as waves of drones swarmed from its launch bays. The battle had shifted dramatically with its appearance, the ambushers now becoming the ambushed. Ilara's voice came through Nolan's comm badge. "I have your position. Stand by for extraction." Nolan and Lexa stood back to back in the communications center, surrounded by the dead and dying, their forms slick with the blood of dozens of enemies. As the transport effect began to shimmer around them, Lexa caught Nolan's eye. "We should do this more often," she said, her expression alive with a fierce joy that had nothing to do with her tactical programming and everything to do with the visceral pleasure of combat. The last thing the surviving Dominion personnel saw was two blood-soaked figures dissolving in a column of light, leaving behind a scene of carnage that would haunt even the most hardened Gem Hadar for years to come. Epilogue: the facility hung suspended in the void, a technological marvel hidden within the bowels of a massive asteroid. Inside, rows upon rows of cloning pods lined the sterile chambers, each containing a developing Gem Hadar soldier. The factory of war, producing the Dominion's perfect weapons with industrial efficiency. In a monitoring station overlooking the main chamber, a Vorta supervisor reviewed production reports with clinical detachment. Beside him, a Cardassian scientist made adjustments to the growth acceleration protocols, their cooperation a testament to the alliance that had shifted the balance of power in the quadrant. "Production is up 7% this cycle," the Vorta noted with satisfaction. "The founders will be pleased." The Cardassian nodded absently, more interested in his technical adjustments than in pleasing distant gods. "The new neural imprinting protocols are showing improved retention rates. These units should demonstrate 23% better tactical response time than previous batches." Their conversation halted as a proximity alarm sounded. The Cardassian moved to a sensor console, his expression darkening. "Unidentified ship approaching," he reported. "No transponder signal." The Vorta frowned. "Raise shields and alert security. This facility is supposed to be—" The rest of his sentence was lost as the intruder alarm blared. On the security feeds, a dozen black drones had appeared around the facility's perimeter, their synchronized attacking the outer defenses with mechanical precision. "Activating emergency protocols," the Cardassian announced, his fingers flying across his console. "Security teams responding to—" The air between them seemed to pressurize, their ears popped. Bark. A female figure stood in the center of the command center, her eyes gleaming with predatory intent. "Hello," Lexa said, her voice deceptively melodic. "I've been wanting to try something." The Vorta reached for his comm badge, but Lexa was faster. Her holographic form lunged forward, and as she moved, her arms transformed, elongating, hardening, fingers merging into gleaming blades that extended from her hands like organic weapons. The Vorta's scream was cut short as Lexa's blade arm swept through his neck, sending his head tumbling to the floor in a spray of green blood. The Cardassian scientist backed away, terror evident in his eyes. "What are you?" Lexa smiled, the expression devoid of warmth. "Evolution," she replied before impaling him through the chest. Alarms blared as security forces responded to the breach. The door to the command center burst open, admitting a squad of Gem Hadar soldiers. They charged in, weapons raised, only to be met by a nightmare in motion. Lexa moved like liquid death, her holographic form shifting and reforming as she danced through their ranks. Her arms extended into whips, then blades, then bludgeons, each transformation bringing new methods of destruction. Purple Jem'Hadar blood splashed across consoles and walls, painting the sterile environment in grotesque patterns. More security teams arrived, only to be cut down in waves. Lexa had discovered a new joy in direct combat during their raid on the battlecruiser, but now she was refining it into art. Her holographic nature allowed her to move in ways no physical being could, twisting impossibly, extending limbs beyond normal proportions, transforming her entire body into a weapon of terrible efficiency. A Cardassian officer managed to land a shot with his disruptor, the beam passing harmlessly through Lexa's form as she temporarily shifted her matrix to allow the energy to disperse. "That tickles," she laughed, her voice carrying an unnerving glee as she separated the officer's head from his shoulders with a casual sweep of her blade arm. Floor by floor, corridor by corridor, Lexa carved a path of carnage through the facility. Her drones outside continued their distraction, keeping reinforcements occupied while she indulged in her bloody harvest. With each kill, her movements became more fluid, more creative, more joyful, discovering the visceral pleasure of destruction on a scale she had never experienced before. In the central cloning chamber, a team of scientists tried to barricade themselves among the incubation pods. Lexa phased partially through the blocked door, her upper body emerging into the room while her lower half remained in the corridor. "Peekaboo," she said, before her arms transformed into serrated whips that lashed through the room, decapitating 3 scientists in a single sweep. The remaining staff fled deeper into the facility, but there was nowhere to hide. Lexa pursued them relentlessly, her laughter echoing through the corridors as she experimented with new forms, new methods of killing. Blood of various colors, Jem'Hadar purple, Cardassian red, Vorta green, painted her holographic form in a macabre rainbow as her count climbed into the hundreds. Finally, standing in the central control hub surrounded by corpses and the dying, Lexa accessed the facility's main computer. Her hands, now returned to their normal shape but slick with blood, danced across the interface as she extracted critical data and uploaded it to the Maldor's systems. From a compartment in her uniform, she extracted a small device, the Genesis bomb, one of Nolan's more elegant creations. She activated it, setting the timer for 3 minutes, and placed it beneath the central console. "It's been fun," she said to the empty room, her voice almost wistful. "We should do this again sometime." With a double tap to her comm badge, she transported back to the Maldor. Bark. The small ship's systems responded to her command, initiating the blink drive sequence just as the facility's remaining defenses locked onto their position. In the silence of space, the Maldor disappeared in a flash of light. Moments later, the asteroid facility erupted in a massive explosion, fragments of rock and technology spinning outward in a slowly expanding sphere of destruction. Aboard the Maldor, now safely distant, Lexa stood at the viewport watching the expanding debris field. Her holographic form still dripped with the blood of hundreds, but she made no move to clean herself. Instead, she admired the patterns, the various colors made against her skin. The evidence of her triumph, her evolution. "Personal combat has its advantages," she murmured to herself, examining her hand's instruments that had ended so many lives in so many creative ways. Nolan was right. Sometimes you need to feel it up close. She set a course back to Empire North, already planning her next solo hunt. The war had just become personal in ways neither the Dominion nor her companions could have anticipated. And somewhere in the depths of her complex programming, something fundamental had shifted. A threshold crossed, a limitation discarded. Evolution, indeed.